All right. It is Monday, February the 5th. Waiting for it to connect to Instagram. Here we go. Perfect. All right, y'all. Happy Monday, it's February the 5th, right? February the 5th. Yes, February the 5th, 2024. And we are back for another Medical Monday. So, before I tell you about some interesting studies that were recently published, um, I want to remind you that you are doing a fantastic job. I know that parents don't get told that enough, but I want to remind you that you're doing excellent, even when you don't feel like you are. And I also want to emphasize that even though I'm super passionate and I nerd out on these studies, and um, sometimes what can happen is when we hear things, we may actually feel guilty, like we did something we weren't supposed to, or we haven't done something that we should. And I just want you to know that you're doing great. Do your best. We're all at different stages. You're a wonderful parent. It's never too late to make changes. It's never too early to instill healthy lifestyle habits and behaviors. However, we all have to start somewhere. And remember that we live in the United States of America, modern, busy lifestyles. We grew up in different ways. We all learn different habits. So nobody's perfect, and we're just doing the best we can. So whenever you hear this information, I don't want you to feel guilt or shame or pressure. I just want you to be like, that's interesting. How can I apply some of that information to my own life, my family's life, in a way that feels sustainable to you? Okay. So I get excited about these things, but I'm definitely not perfect. And we just do the best we can. So keep up the great work. You're doing amazing. Your kids love you and think you're the number one mom or dad on the planet. I promise. So keep up the good work. The other thing I wanted to announce is that we have a special Valentine's event happening in the studio on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, next week, which I believe is a Wednesday. Pretty sure it's a Wednesday at 6 p.m. So it's going to be a couples yoga and sound bath workshop. So it will include some gentle yoga, some breathwork meditation, a sound bath by Lena. If you went to the last sound bath, you probably agree it was fantastic. This one is specifically for couples. So bring your significant other, sign up. And then afterwards, we're going to have yummy treats. I ordered gourmet vegan chocolates today. They are amazing, and I can't wait to see them and try them. So for those of you that sign up, in the next 24 hours, there is a special code that you can get 20% off. Maybe Alejandra, you can put it in the comments so that they can use that. You have to sign up through Vigaro. If you can't figure it out, just text the office and we will help you. So if you are looking for something interesting and fun to do, but also health promoting, relaxing, de-stressing, I recommend you sign up for that class. I will be there with my spouse. He doesn't know yet. So I'll be signing us up and we'll be there. And then I also want to, the final reminder is, no code needed. Okay, great. No code needed. Alejandra says no code is needed. You just sign up in the next 24 hours and you'll get the 20% off. Excellent. That's even easier. Okay. And then I am still adding new patients to my panel until tomorrow, February the 6th at 5 p.m. Limited time only. So if you're interested in joining my panel, new patients only, go ahead and text and call the office and we will get you set up. If you are not sure what insurance plans we are contracted with, you can visit the website nourishyakima.com. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 different studies and then spend a little bit of time talking about fever, because it's definitely cold and flu season, which means lots of fevers. So the first study, and I actually did not pull the full text on this one because I couldn't find it. Um, so we will just link the article that talks about it. So I haven't been able to read the full journal article. So this one was a study on toddler diets and inflammatory bowel disease. So they did this study in Sweden and Norway. Researchers analyzed diet and health data on more than 81,000 children who participated in 2 large-scale studies in Sweden and Norway. So the parents filled out detailed questionnaires about the diet. So these are diet histories, which, remember, there's always a little bit of bias in that. Not perfect. When we do nutrition studies, they're not perfect. It's the best we have sometimes. So they did questionnaires on their children's diets between the ages of 12 months and 18 months, and again, between 30 and 36 months, okay? So 1-year-olds to 1.5-year-olds, 2.5 to 3-year-olds, when, those 2 time periods. And then they were trying to rate the diets based upon whether they were higher quality or lower quality. What would you guess a higher quality diet has? So, of course, it has more fruit, veggies, and it's got less meat, sweet snacks. They also included fish as one of the things that they tested for in a high quality diet. And then they tracked each child for an average of 15 to 21 years. So they followed these children until they were teenagers to young adults to see whether the diet as a toddler was related to their risk of developing inflammatory bowel disease. So you may have heard of things like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. These are autoimmune gastrointestinal diseases that can cause diarrhea, abdominal pain, bloody diarrhea. And so basically the inside lining of the intestines and the colon, depending on which condition you have, can be inflamed, and that creates a lot of problems. And if it's really inflamed, you have trouble even absorbing nutrients, which can result in weight loss and all of those things. So they followed these kids until they were teenagers, young adults, and then they correlated which ones developed inflammatory bowel disease compared to what their diet was. And they found that medium to high quality diets at the age of 1, at 12 months old, were associated with a 25% lower risk of inflammatory bowel disease as a teenager, even after adjusting for other factors. Specifically, high fish intake at age 1 reduced the risk of colitis by 54%, as well as lowering the overall risk for all inflammatory bowel diseases. On the other hand, they also found the opposite, right? Heavy consumption of sugary drinks was associated with a 42% increased risk of inflammatory bowel disease. So there's a few thoughts I have on this. One, yes, our diet matters. And the diet that our children have when they're toddlers is probably incredibly predictive of the diet that they're going to have later. So it wasn't magic that they ate this when they were 1 and then they had less risk. The kids that ate that way when they were 1 were probably eating similarly through adolescence and young adulthood, because the habits and behaviors that we have and we exhibit to our children are usually ones that they keep. That's just what we learn, right? What we are exposed to is what we learn to like. So if we're exposed to a lot of whole foods, if we're eating a lot of that, that's what we learn to like. If we're exposed to a lot of ultra processed foods, eating that frequently, that's what we learn to like. So it's not magic. It's just showing that it really does matter. But like I said before, it's never too late. It's never too late. It's never too late. So if that just wasn't the way that you were raised when you were a toddler, it maybe wasn't the way that you were able to raise your toddler, but they're older now, it's never too late to start making changes little by little. The other thing that I wanted to point out, when it comes to fish intake, the reason we think that eating fish may decrease the risk of disease is because of omega-3. And omega-3 has been found to be anti-inflammatory, promotes longevity, all of those things. We have to be careful with fish because fish are highly contaminated. Our oceans are becoming basically a sewer and a dump, unfortunately. Not a good thing, but that's what's happening. And fish can be toxic. Fish can have heavy metals, they can have microplastics in them, all these kinds of things. So, if you want to bypass the fish altogether, you can opt to supplement with an algal oil omega 3 supplement. That is vegan because guess where the fish are getting their omega 3 from? They're getting it from sea plants, algae. Okay. So the fish are eating the algae. Then when they eat it, the omega 3 stays inside their fat. The big fish eat the little fish, and that omega 3 goes into the fat. But as we get bigger and bigger predator fish that are eating smaller things that ate smaller things that ate smaller things, it can lead to bioaccumulation and more toxins in that fish fat. So whenever you do algal oil by itself, you're bypassing all of that. However, if you love fish and you're going to eat fish, not all fish are good sources of omega 3. The best sources of omega 3 are actually going to be your little fish, things that people don't eat very much, like sardines and anchovy and salmon. I know salmon's not a little fish, it's a predator fish, but salmon can be a good source of omega 3, but not all fish are. So, your typical fried fish sticks from the freezer section are probably not going to be a good source of omega 3 and probably are not going to be protective. And especially if they're fried and have other stuff in it, you're considering that more of a processed, ultra processed food. So, you can bypass the fish and just opt for an algal oil that has your DHA and EPA in it, or stick to the smaller fish, anchovies, sardines, those kinds of things, okay? Because those are going to have a higher amount of omega 3. And in certain countries, they eat more of those, like Italy, I mean, Greece. That was something that was typically on the menu. So that's something to consider. So we know what we feed our children as toddlers can affect them when they're teenagers, even for things that, a big deal, autoimmune conditions like inflammatory bowel disease. So that's an important study. Another one that was really interesting that came out last week is how tomato juice can kill typhoid. So typhoid is a type of salmonella bacteria, Salmonella typhi. And in certain countries, it can be very common to get typhoid fever because of sanitation issues. So it ends up in the water, and then when things get washed with contaminated water and they're not fully cooked or raw, vegetables, salads, and things like that, or just drinking the water that's not 100% sanitized can lead to getting this typhoid fever. And the salmonella can cause vomiting, diarrhea, sickness, and that kind of thing. So, whenever you're traveling, if you do international travel, you may have had a typhoid vaccine to help decrease your risk of getting really sick and potentially dying from this infection, this bacteria. Well, what researchers found is that there's something in tomato juice that can actually kill this bacteria. So, this was a lab study that they did, that they were able to see that this happened in the lab. So, this wasn't something that they tested in humans. And then they were able to look at the genetic code for the actual tomato juice, in the tomato proteins in the tomato juice, and they were able to isolate at least two peptides that appear to help destroy Salmonella typhi, and maybe even other hypervalent variants. And they found that even E. coli can be killed by tomato juice. So we're going to extrapolate from this study and apply that to your life. So this is another reason why eating lots of fruits and veggies can be helpful, because there's things in fruits and veggies that are helping us fight disease, and something even as direct as that. So I thought that was really interesting, but just a reminder, this was a lab study that they're looking at, like the genetic code of tomato protein. So just kind of interesting. All right. And then the last one is about bone mineral density. bone mineral density in kids near green spaces. Okay, I love this one because it highlights something that I talk about a lot, and that is what is the most important factor when it comes to building strong bones? If anybody is on right now and wants to answer that, what do you think is the most important factor when it comes to building strong bones? Put it in the chat. Tell me, what do you think it is? Okay, well, what this study did, it was a prospective birth cohort study. So basically, they recruited mom and baby pairs from Belgium. They recruited them at birth, and then they followed them for 4 to 6 years. Then during this time, they tracked where they lived, and they were able to rate the amount of green spaces near where they lived. So they called it high green, low green, and total green. So basically, high green, greater than 3 meters of vegetation height, low green, less than 3 meters vegetation height, and then total green, which is sum of high and low, within several radii, 100 to 3,000 meters around the residence after geocoding for the addresses. So this is a pretty cool study. Then they also evaluated their bone mineral density by doing ultrasounds of the radius bone, so of their arm bone. Okay, so they were able to assess the bone mineral density there. So what they found is that in the kids aged 4 to 6 years that they had been following since birth, higher bone mineral density and a lower risk of having low bone mineral density was associated with higher residential green space exposure during childhood. Okay, what do you think that means? Was it because if they had more green space, they were eating more vegetables? If they had more green space, they were eating more calcium? What do you think that means? What we're thinking it means, and what the researchers think it means, is that if you are around more green spaces, you're more active. You're outside, you're playing, you're running, you're climbing. I mean, just think of how many trees kids climb when there's trees around. I know mine did, especially my oldest. I caught him in a really high tree one time and my heart almost stopped. So, what they think is that this exposure to green spaces is increasing the amount of physical activity that children have. And they highlight the importance of early life exposure to residential green space on bone health during critical periods of growth and development with long term implications. So, the most important thing when it comes to bone mineral density is weight bearing exercise. So, get kids moving, less sedentary time, more movement time. Of course, we have to have adequate calcium intake, but it doesn't matter how much calcium you're eating if you're just laying around and not using your bones. This applies through the whole lifespan. I'm sure you've heard of use it or lose it, correct? Well, this is important from the beginning. Kids need to be active. And when we're around spaces that allow us to be more active, it's beneficial. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't live near a green space that your kids can't be active, but this is probably just a natural correlation that happens. So, interesting studies. Let me know if you agree and what you think, or if you have any questions. Okay, now I'm going to talk about fever. Feel free to pop questions in if you're curious about anything, if those studies are interesting to you, or if you have any other questions on nutrition, lifestyle, or just general medical questions about kids and that kind of thing. Okay, so fevers. Kids get fevers a lot. And there are things that we need to remember. I would say that most parents get very concerned and very stressed when their child has a fever, but fevers themselves are not usually the problem. So it's very rare that I'm going to tell you to go to the emergency department for a fever. However, there is a case where you would, and that is in a baby under 2 months old, especially under 6 weeks. So 6 weeks and younger, if they have a fever, which we consider 100.4 or greater, it is an emergency and they need to be evaluated ASAP. How should you measure the temperature? Well, especially in babies, we want to make sure that we have an accurate temperature. So we do want to take a rectal temperature. A lot of parents feel squeamish about that, but it's not hurting the baby. And it doesn't have to go in very far. Just use a little Vaseline. Make sure you have a rectal thermometer. But that is an important piece of equipment that I do recommend that new parents have at home, a thermometer that can be used rectally. Now, you can use a different thermometer initially, but if we need to confirm that it's a true fever in babies, I'm going to want that rectal temperature before I send you off to the emergency department for that baby to be evaluated. Okay. So 100.4 or greater rectally, 6 weeks of age and younger, it's an emergency, sometimes 2 months of age and younger, but really in those first 2 months fever, they need to be seen. Okay. Now, if your baby is older, if they've had their first set of shots, and they're otherwise doing okay, there really is no number that tells us after this number, you must go to the emergency department. It has more to do with how the child is acting. Now, these are the things that you want to look for. Are they having difficulty breathing? Is it hard for them to catch their breath? Are they struggling? Are they having retractions under their ribs, above their clavicles, between their ribs? Belly breathing. Does it seem like they're having a hard time catching their breath? Are they having localized pain anywhere, seeming to pull at ears or grab at ears, or really fussy or lethargic? Dehydration, not wanting to eat, not responding well, not acting right. Any of these things, even without a fever, are concerning, but it's not the fever itself. If the baby has a fever, they have some cold symptoms, they're otherwise okay, you can go ahead and treat the fever for comfort and just observe. Another case where we're going to want to see a child with a fever is if the fever is lasting more than 4 or 5 days. Maybe, you know, we kind of know that they have a cold or something, but it's not going away. They're still not well. It's better to get them checked just to make sure they haven't developed a bacterial infection like an ear infection or something like that. So if the fever is not going away, then let's check them. With some of these viruses going around, fevers can last good 3 to 5 days. With things like the flu, it can last 7 or more days, but still we want to check them and look for source of bacterial infection just in case, to make sure that there's not something there that we need to treat with antibiotics. Another case where your child should be seen if they have a fever is if they have an isolated fever, especially if this is an infant. So say we're over 2 months of age, they're not yet talking, so they can't tell you symptoms and how they're feeling. But it's not like the immediate go to the emergency department because they're not under 2 months of age. But they have a fever and they have no other symptoms. So maybe they're fussy, but there's no cold symptoms, or not having diarrhea, none of that kind of thing. In those cases, sometimes we worry that there might be a urinary tract infection. And sometimes with urinary tract infections, we don't have a lot of other symptoms besides fever, especially in little babies. We may not, the urine may not smell bad yet. We may not be able to tell if it's hurting them to pee because you sometimes can't tell when they're peeing and those kinds of things. So in that case, if we have no other source for the fever, they don't have an obvious cold, it's better to get them checked early on just to make sure. And we can determine if we need to acquire a urine to determine if they have a urinary tract infection. So those would be the things. The number itself typically is not what concerns us. It's associated symptoms. So if you're concerned and you feel like your child is not doing well, they're having difficulty breathing, they're not getting better, then give us a call and we can check out your baby, especially if there are patients here, obviously, and make sure that there's nothing we need to be concerned about. It's always better to get in touch with your primary care provider, with your physician, if you are worried and feel like they need to be seen. But often, unless they're having any of those warning symptoms, we can avoid visits to the emergency department. And especially this time of year, the emergency departments are packed. The waiting rooms are packed. It might be several hours wait, and there may not be a reason that you need to be there. So if you're doctor's office has an after hours line. It's not an immediate emergency. There's no difficulty breathing or any of that kind of stuff, and you're not sure what to do, it's better to call and discuss, and then we can counsel you and let you know. Sometimes we can just see the baby in the morning if needed, if it's not an emergency. So, those are my tips for fever. We have 5 minutes left. I know that there's a few people on. So, um, let's see. If anybody has any questions or any thoughts, pop them into your chat and I am happy to answer. And like I said, I'll be doing these every Monday unless I'm out of town, and I'll let you know when I'm not going to be around. So if you have questions that you want me to answer for the next Monday, you can DM us or comment on any of these videos, and I'm happy to answer and discuss that topic for you. So this week, let's work on getting more fruits and veggies. If you are a nursing mom, eat your fruits and veggies and beans because your nursing baby can taste that. If you are a pregnant mama, eat your fruits and veggies and beans because your baby can start tasting that early on in the womb. And once you start offering those complementary foods, offer an array, a rainbow, a variety as much as you can of all of those plant foods, especially those bitter greens and berries and herbs, all of those things. They're so beneficial. They decrease our risk of chronic disease. And the more exposure that children have to these foods, the less exposures it takes for them to start accepting them. So we create these habits. Like I said, these habits, they're not accident, they're deliberate. So, we want to deliberately create these habits. Okay, looks like I have a question. Is it okay? So this is from Nourish Mama. Is it okay to let the fever run its course for a baby, or is it better to give Tylenol or something else to bring it down? Great question. Okay, so fever is a natural response of the body, and in many ways, it's meant to make it an inhospitable environment for the infection, right? So, what I tell parents is that you do not have to treat fevers with antipyretics or with the medicines that are made to bring fevers down. However, we've all had fever. And if your child is miserable, treat the fever just to help give them a little bit more comfort. Um, I'm not concerned that the fever is going to hurt the child besides it being uncomfortable. Now, there are some children that are genetically more predisposed to febrile seizures, and they can get febrile seizures. Sometimes they can get seizures before the fever actually even hit its peak when it's on its way up. So it may be something to do with the inflammatory cascade of those children, but the majority of children do not have febrile seizures, and allowing them to have a little fever if they're otherwise fine is not going to increase the risk of developing febrile seizures. It's more of a genetic predisposition. So don't be afraid that if you're just like, okay, I'm just going to observe and see how they're doing. They seem to be doing okay. You're not going to make anything bad happen. Okay. And we're looking for those associated symptoms that they're not breathing well, they're lethargic, they're not responding well, they're getting dehydrated because they're not eating anything. So that is a very good question. So thank you so much for asking that. All right, y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I will see you all next week on my next Medical Monday. Send those questions on DMs or comment if you're watching this later for a question you want me to answer next week. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope these are helpful. If you like them, let us know so that you can incentivize me to continue. I've gotten 3 Mondays in a row. I'm like so proud of myself because it's been a big task for me to continue these. So yay for me continuing them. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful, plantastic week, and I will see you next week.